Yep, and I am ready whenever. If we want to give them a few more minutes, or if anybody already has questions or has anything that they'd like to ask or any comments, then feel free. But I didn't have a specific topic or a particular, focus. I was just gonna basically make myself available to answer any kind of questions that anybody might have on anything. So,
Cool. Well, I am interested in the zodiac and the corruption because I'm working on that chapter in the book that I'm working on. And, we're told to not do witchcraft and things like that and horoscopes, but yet we talk about the zodiac and the months and the seasons and everything. So, was there a point where it was like corrupted?
yeah, that's a really good question, and that's a perfect way to begin. And I can also go into elaboration reading about, because that's something that's part of the book that I just completed on the notes for the Flat Earth Conference. Because one of the things that is addressed in the book of Enoch, and I was talking to Rob about this when we did the show on the calendar. Basically, Enoch, he describes the motions of the sun, the moon, all the planets, and also of the zodiac, and how the sun goes through the zodiac once a year, but then also over a 25,920 year cycle, it will go through what's called the great year. And so all of these bodies have influence on us. And it talks about this even in the rabbinical text. But at some point, what um, what is mentioned with regard to astrology, even though everybody knew, even going back to, because Abraham was taught this, and it speaks about in one of the extra biblical texts how he even taught the Egyptians about the zodiac and also the Mazzaroth, the signs, and even gave them knowledge of the zodiac, which we see that all. Um, it's all in the Dendera temple there in Karnak, Egypt. There's a huge mosaic on the ceiling of all the constellations, the zodiac, and the way that they are laid out. But originally, this information was just part of the knowledge that was given even to Adam when he was cast forth from paradise. There was 5 books that were given to him, and they were part of the books of creation. And it makes mention of this in the Assater, that Carol that you had finished and made available to everybody. It's a incredibly knowledgeable book, and it talks about these things. And it also speaks about how even Enoch, he received this knowledge from Adam, and then he was shown by the angel Uriel about the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries, which confirmed and explained the things that were found in the book of Enoch. And so let me find this portion on the 7 heavens, and then I'll read some passages which describe the how these particular planets, and when I say the planets, meaning and talking about the Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars. Because as we now know with the biblical cosmology, the Sun and the Moon move in circuit around Polaris just as all of the other heavenly luminaries, and the Earth is motionless. It's the foundation for the heavens, which were spread as curtain above it, and it being immovable, it's not considered what we referred to as a planet or the wandering stars. And so let me find that, and I'll be Alexa, turn the volume down, and then I'll read that particular passage. Okay. And then I'll share the influence also of how this was set up. It speaks in the book of the Secrets of Enoch. It talks about there, it says, I made foundation of lights around the water and created 7 circles from inside, and imaged the water like crystal, wet and dry, that is to say, like glass. He's speaking about the creation of the firmament here. And then he talks about how the the space between the bottom of the vaulted dome and the earth, he divided it into 7 circles, and these 7 circles are where the tabernacle of the different planets were placed. And so I'll continue reading just to give you an idea, and then we'll go into the 7 heavens, and I'll give you greater detail on that. And then so it says, and the circumcision of the waters and the other elements, and I showed each one of them its road, and the 7 stars, each one of them in its heaven, that they go thus, and I saw that it was good. And I separated between light and between darkness, that is to say, in the midst of the water hidden thither, and I said to the light that it should be the day, and to the darkness that it should be the night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. And so, just like we see in the Genesis narrative, where it speaks about the establishment of creation, in the book of the Secrets of Enoch, it also speaks about this, just gives us different description and explains it in a little bit more a different way. And so reading that, we can get a sense, especially when you have understanding of the true nature of the cosmology, as to what Enoch is speaking about and what is being specified in these particular texts. I'll continue just a little bit more, and then we'll go into the 7 heavens, and I'll explain the tabernacles which were set up for each of these 7 planets, and then I'll explain their influence on humanity. And then I made firm the heavenly circle, and made that the lower water which is under heaven collect itself together into one whole, and that the chaos became dry, and it became so. Out of the waves I created rock hard and big, and from the rock I piled up the dry, and the dry I called earth, and the midst of the earth I called the abyss, that is to say, the bottomless. I collected the sea in one place and bound it together with a yoke, and I said to the sea, behold, I give you your eternal limits, and you shall not break loose from your component parts. Thus I made fast the firmament. And so, of course, this is the second day. And so we know that the firmament was established to divide the waters above from the waters below, and that the waters below then were collected, became the oceans, became the seas, and established the sea level. And then the rock, the dry places, were lifted above that sea level and became the habitable places of the earth. And so all that is described in that. All right, so now I'm going to read a few passages about the planets and about the 7 heavens and the tabernacles, just to give you an idea, and then we'll go into. And I know this is a long answer for what you're asking, but since we have time and until the others get in with their questions, I'll elaborate on this because actually other people have asked me the same thing, and so this is a good chance for me to kind of put it all together in one place. In the Sefer Yetzirah, which is the book of creation, one of the books that in the ancient Israelites, the Hebrew say were, one of the first books that the Most High uh, established, and he explains the establishment of the creation within it. It says this: many of the ancients supposed that there were concentric spheres which were transparent but solid, and that these spheres revolved around the earth, carrying the heavenly bodies with them. In one of these spheres they supposed was the sun, in another the moon, in another the fixed stars, in another the planets, and it was the harmonious movement of these concentric and transparent orbs which it was supposed produced the music of the spheres. And so here it's telling us that basically that the stars and the planets and all the luminaries are kind of embedded into the firmament, and that the firmament spins to create what is the motion of all the luminaries as they circle Polaris, which is exactly what we see in the time lapse photography of the star trails of the luminaries over the course of an evening. And this is also what Enoch describes in the book on the courses of the heavenly luminaries, which is something that I'll be speaking on at the conference. And so, in another passage from the book of the Bee, it says, on the fourth day, God made the luminaries, the sun, the moon, and the stars, of the substances air, light, and fire. He took aerial material and prepared vessels like lamps, and mixed fire with light and filled them. And because in the nature of fire there was no light, nor heat in that of light, the fire imparted heat to the light, and the light gave luminosity to the fire. And from these two were the luminaries, the sun, the moon, and the stars fabricated. And so we see here in this passage that the luminaries are light, air, and fire. Um, and so there's no earth-like substance to them. They're not, planets or earth-like in any manner. They're just luminosity. The path of the luminaries is beneath the firmament, and they are not fixed as men have foolishly stated, but the angels guide them. The sun performs his course from the east to the west, and then goes behind the lofty northern mountains the whole night until he rises in the east, which this is exactly the motion that Enoch attributes to the sun as well. He says that it goes from east to west and then north and back to the east, which is a circle, and that's why we see in the morning the sun rises on our eastern horizon. It will cross our southern skies. It will set in the west, and then when darkness, when we see the sunset and darkness comes over us, that is actually day for those that live on the northern side of the earth plane. And so for those 12 hours, they'll receive daylight, and that will be our night. And then the sun goes around the northern plane and then comes back to the east in the morning, and that's when we have sunrise and new day. So that's the cycle. All right, let me go down to also from the Sefer Yetzirah. It says, these seven are planets of the universe: the Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars. The 7 days are the days of creation, and these are the seven gateways of a man: 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, a mouth, and through which he perceives by his senses. But these 7 letters were also made 7 worlds, 7 heavens, 7 lands, 7 seas, 7 rivers, 7 deserts, 7 days as before, 7 weeks from Passover to Pentecost, and every seventh year a jubilee. So here again we see that the sun and the moon are included as part of the planets, the wandering stars, not the earth, as science tells us. Science teaches that the earth is one of the 9 planets of the solar system, but that is incorrect. The true cosmology, the biblical cosmology, teaches that the sun and the moon, along with Venus, Mercury, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars, those make up the 7 planets of the universe. Another passage here. The 7 days of the week are called after the 7 planets: the Sun, Venus, Mercury, the Moon, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars. In what order are they placed in heaven? They are distributed there as the Sun and the Moon and the 5 planets. The firmament is divided into 7 degrees, one above the other. There are 7 distinct places for these 7 planets, and this is their order. The first degree is near the earth, and this lowest degree is the habitation of the moon, in which the moon makes a circuit around the firmament. The second degree is the habitation of Mercury, in which it describes its circuit in the firmament. The third degree is the habitation of Venus, in which it also describes its circuit in the firmament. The fourth degree is the middle of them, the habitation of the Sun, which completes its circuit of the heaven in 12 months. The fifth degree is the habitation of Mars, which makes its circuit in the firmament. The seventh degree is the highest of all, the habitation of Saturn, which completes its circuit in 3 years. This is the order of their work. Saturn, okay, here, this particular passage tells you the influence of the different luminaries over the individual as well as the um, collective humanity. And so, you know how they say in a horoscope, you have your chart where they look at where the planets were located. You have your sun sign. Like myself, I'm a Leo, which means I was born in August, and August is the month of Leo. And that's where the sun is located in that particular constellation of the zodiac. But in order to get your full horoscope, they look at all the other 6 planets and where they are located during the time of your birth. Because, as I said, each one of them has influence, and a specific influence over the lives of humanity. And so, depending on where they are located, they are able to collect data and determine how your general characteristic will be according to your astrological chart. And so it says here, this is the order of their work. Saturn is appointed over the poor and needy women, over faintness and sickness, diseases of the body, and over death. His appearance is like that of an old man with a sickle in his hand. Mars is appointed over war, bloodshed, and the sword, over the wicked, over slander, over strife, battle, hatred, jealousy, quarrels, over warriors, wounds, injuries, bruises, over fire, water, and destruction. His appearance is like that of an armed warrior with a sword in his right hand, and he appears like a man of wrath and a stirrer up of strife. Wherever he turns, wickedness ensues. He looks terrible in his coat of mail, and with the spear which he bears in his left hand. Jupiter is appointed over life, peace, and good, over prosperity, tranquility, joy, pleasant conversation, rejoicing, riches, greatness, sovereignty, and majesty. His appearance is like that of a valiant and noble looking man, and his head is that of a ram. Venus is appointed over kindness, favor, love, lust, passion, desire, marriage, the birth of a man and animals, the fruits of the earth and the fruits of the tree. Its form is that of a young girl beautifully adorned and swaying a branch of a tree in her hand. Mercury is appointed over wisdom, discretion, understanding, knowledge, and the active intellect enabling one to unravel mysteries, to devise plans in every branch of work, and in the writings of any language. Its form is that of an old man with thin lips. He possesses wings, and the lower part of the body is like a dragon. The sun is appointed over light to separate light from darkness, and through it to enable us to calculate the days, months, and years, and do every kind of work, to make any cunning work, to walk away, to walk any distance, and to migrate from city to city, and from town to town. The moon holds the key of heaven and earth, and is appointed over morning and evening. She is set over all creatures to lead them in the right or wrong way, although she has no power in herself either to do good or evil. But everything is done by order and command. Everything was created by means of the word of God. Hence, the rabbis have said that the orbit of the sun and the circuit of the moon, the order of the stars, the arrangement of the planets, the calculation of the circuits, the lengths of the days, and the division of the hours, which are at first long and then become gradually shorter, are all the work of God. And that's from chapter 4 of the Chronicles of Jeremiah. I'll share, there's one more, I believe, that also speaks of this as well. And let me find that particular passage. It speaks of the seven heavens as well. I actually don't have it in this particular portion, but if I pull it up, I'll share it. But um, and so to summarize, as far as um, your particular question, Carol, it was after the the fallen angels basically counterfeited and established the worship of the sun and the moon and the stars, and of the wandering stars as basically the pagan deities, that they also instituted fertility festivals, which were basically large orgies, and also the sacrifice of children and victim sacrifice, all at the same time that they held these Bacchian festivals, that the the knowledge of astrology became corrupted and became tainted and connected to witchcraft. And that's why we're told in, I believe it's the Wisdom of Solomon. I'll see if I can pull it up here. But in the Wisdom of Solomon, it tells us not to worship the stars, um, because of their influence. I'll see if I can pull up that passage real quick. But that's why God warns us about getting involved in witchcraft and the worship of, the planets, the sun, the stars, any of that. And it's better for us to know God and to worship Him. And again, it's because the fallen angels had corrupted the knowledge of astrology, and they demanded victim sacrifice. And when they did that, that's when God stirred everybody away from involvement, especially the Israelites. Okay, I think I've got that. Let me find the exact passage. But did you want me to add anything else with regard to that?
Well, that's what I was curious about. So it was when they were thrown out of heaven after the war in heaven, and they were uh, come down, and then dome was created of the firmament to enclose them and the earth.
Yes. And then when they were cast down to here, they involved themselves with the pre-Adamic people. And when they involved themselves with the preadamites, that's when they established and created these false religions. And that's why we see in the worship in the antediluvian age, the worship of the feathered serpent, we see the demand for blood. Because also we know that they, as we see in Genesis 3, where the serpent would feed off the dust of the earth, that our bodies are made from the dust, and so they are cannibals. They not only feed off the flesh of humanity, but also specifically the blood of humanity. And so in these pagan religions, you will see often, and even with what the Illuminati, the elites are involved in now, they are cannibals and they do drink the blood of humanity, and they often try to frighten to death their victims so that their blood is pumped with adrenaline, and then that blood, when they drink it, it gets them higher supposedly than even drugs like heroin and really hardcore um, drugs, which a lot of people are addicted to. They say that, and they call it adrenochrome. And I'm actually going to be doing a show about this very, very soon. I'm still doing some research on it, but the adrenochrome is a drug that they extract from their victims during the time when they're being frightened to death, and they sell this to other elites. There's like a whole black market for this. But anyway, so let me read this passage from the Wisdom of Solomon. It's chapter 13. It says, "Surely vain are all men by nature, who are ignorant of God, and could not, out of the good things that are seen, know him that is, neither by considering the works did they acknowledge the workmaster, but deemed either fire or wind or the swift air, or the circle of stars, or the violent water, or the lights of heaven, to be the gods which govern the world, with whose beauty if they being delighted, took them to be gods. Let them know how much better the Lord of them is, for the first author of beauty hath created them. But if they were astonished at their power and virtue, let them understand by them how much mightier he is that made them. For by the greatness and beauty of the creatures, proportionately the maker of them is seen." And so you see here that, again, God is warning us and warning Solomon to warn the people not to worship the stars, but to worship the maker of the stars. Just like during the time of Babylon and Nimrod, we see that they worshiped Nimrod as God, and Nimrod worshiped fire. And we know that, Abraham, not bowing down to Nimrod or his God, he was cast into a furnace of fire, but he was protected by Yahushua, the angel of the Lord, the Word of God, that Christ went into the fire and protected him, kept him cool, and then brought him out alive, just as he did Daniel and the two other scribes and prophets that were with him, that were also cast in during the time of Nebuchadnezzar's day. The same thing. They worshiped fire. They worshiped these pagan deities. They worshiped the stars. They worshiped the pagan gods. And they were also protected in the same manner that Abraham was. But this is a story that is not ascribed in the King James Version of the Bible, but if you read the extra biblical text, there's many references to how Abraham was tried in this manner, and that he, trusting God, not only was protected, but that it was through him that the promises were given to Israel, and that his children became the Israelites, the Hebrew Israelites, and that it was to Abraham that a covenant was made. that he would inherit the land of promise, and that his children would be the seed of promise, and that it would be through his bloodline that Yeshua, as Savior Messiah, would be born, and that he would be the eternal King, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords.
So just one more thing. I know there are more questions. So we talk about the zodiac and like the sun going through for the seasons, but it's just that's astronomy, not astrology. So
Right,
kind of
right.
okay.
And then even as I said, because we see that Enoch speaks about, and the ancient Hebrews also speak about the influence of the stars on our lives, but you know, we don't want to be involved in the worship of them, or um, to study more, you know, astrology and the study of charts, or even involve, you know, some people read palms or whatever. That if you put those kind of things over the worship of the Most High God and the study of the gospel and His Word, that is, you know, incorrect. That we should always study Him, um, and but then if you, after knowing and understanding that God is the creator of the stars, and that they, in creating them, that they do have influence on humanity, that's, you know, just simply knowledge of the way things are. But it's when you get involved in worshiping the stars as gods, or these pagan deities as the ancient peoples did, that's where you're being led astray. And so that would be what we call witchcraft.
All right, thanks. I know there's more questions, so thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
All right, so we have a question from Michael. He asks, to establish a timeline for Genesis, was Genesis 1 2 after Atlantis? Also, what was the state of the earth at this point in time? And was it entirely flooded out, or was the flood only over the portion of the earth where Atlantis was located?
Really good question, and I'm going to refer to Second Peter to bring in more detail on this particular teaching. And so let me pull that up first, and then we'll study it together. But yes, Genesis 1 2 is after the antediluvian age. And when I say antediluvian, I'm talking about where the earth became destroyed and without form, um, and void, which is not the flood of Noah's day. And if you study Second Peter, you'll see that this is Second Peter, Jeremiah 4, and also Ezekiel chapter 26. And actually, I could pull this up from my book, but I'll just read this passage here first. But if you want to know more about what I'm going to be going into here, in the first 3 chapters of my firmament book, I talk about the antediluvian age, what I call the prior times, and I bring out in great detail, even from the Hebrew and the language that we see there in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, that in the Hebrew you have, the wording is, the earth was without form and void. In the Hebrew, it means that the primeval earth became a deserted wasteland and an indistinguishable ruin. Haya, wa tohu wa bohu. And so, looking at each of those particular words, we see that the earth became destroyed, that it was not created this way. And there's confirmation of this from several passages, but let's start with this here first. In Second Peter, it says, knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers walking after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. For this they willingly are ignorant of, that by the word of God, which means Christ, the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, this is the prior times, was the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. But the heavens and the earth which are now, this is the second earth age, and the recreation of the earth that we see from Genesis 1 2 and onward, by the same word are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. But, beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. So here we learn that the second world age would be a cycle of 7 1,000-year periods, which is exactly what we learn of the second world age. That even right now, we are living in the 6,000 years of the second world age before the coming millennial reign, and that the millennial reign will equate to and correlate with what is the Sabbath day of rest. And then after the 7,000 years of this second world age, then we would have an eternal age where there will be no more death, no more darkness. All the former things will have been swept away. There will be no more suffering, no more tears. But, death, the devil, all of that, evil, everything will be swept away and will no longer be present in that eternal age. And God willing, all of us will be counted in the salvation of that age. All right, but continuing. But the Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some men count slackness, but is long suffering to us, word not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. Because he doesn't want any of us to die. He wants all of us to be counted in the salvation that he is generously giving to all of us. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burnt up. Seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons ought ye to be in all holy conversation and godliness, looking for and hasting unto the coming of the day of God, wherein the heavens being on fire shall be dissolved, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for new heavens and a new earth, wherein dwelleth righteousness. Wherefore, beloved, seeing that ye look for such things, be diligent that ye may be found of him in peace, without spot and blameless. And account that the longsuffering our Lord is salvation, even as our beloved brother Paul, also according to the wisdom given unto him, hath written unto you. As also, well, I'm actually going to stop there, but basically, so we see in Revelation that when Christ comes to take his judgment seat, and you can find this in Revelation 19 through 21, that when he comes to take his judgment seat and New Jerusalem descends out of the heavens, that when he comes here to the earth, that's when the earth is destroyed, and there will be a new heaven and a new earth, and it is by fire, because God told Adam that the earth would be destroyed once by water, which it was, and that was completely destroyed, and that's what we're talking about. They call this the katabole. It's Katabole. You can look up that Greek word, and it refers to this total destruction. And so here in Revelation 21, it says, "And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, For the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And then, and I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned, adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. And so, as I have taught and as I've brought out, and a lot of people think that the destruction of the heavens and the earth happens after the millennial age. But in truth, it happens before the millennial age, and that it is when Christ comes again and the stars come crashing down here to the earth, that is part of what will be the destruction of the earth in order to bring judgment against the wicked and those not written into the books of life. And so the stars crashing to the earth will set ablaze the the earth, and every living thing and every living creature here on the earth will then die, and there will be a new heaven and a new earth, and what will be the establishment of a new age. And the reason everything is destroyed is because Christ, as the bridegroom, is coming here to the earth. And so the earth is being restored in harmony and innocence and purity for the coming of the bridegroom. And so, and if you want to read more and study more about this, um, I write a great detail about this in my one of my newest book, in the War in Heaven, and also in Paradise, the sides of the north and the mount of the congregation. I share all the different passages, which from many different texts, when you read the extra biblical text, and I can actually share with you a portion of that. Let me bring up one of my books here, but like the book of uh, the sibling oracles, the second book. In that book, we see mention of this as well. But let me bring up. And also in the Revelation of St. John the Theologian, there's great mention of this as well. Pulling up the text, but can you read the other portion of that question so I can make sure I'm
Sure.
covering it all?
Sure. And it's actually like a three-part question. That's just part one, Susan. So,
Okay.
okay. So, the first question was to establish a timeline for Genesis. Was Genesis 1, 2 after Atlantis? Also, what was the state of the earth at this point in time? Was it entirely flooded out, or was the flood only over the portion of the earth where Atlantis was located?
Okay, yes. Okay. And so yes, um the flood was total and it destroyed everything. And actually let me pull up something from the firmament here too, and I can share more on that as well. Um but yes, the flood that I read about in Second Peter, it destroyed everything. And it was complete, and that's why we see in Genesis 1 2 that the earth is being, and onward, we see that the earth is being restored and having to also be repopulated with creatures, that God had to not only recreate the earth, but he had to repopulate it with all the different creatures because everything was wiped out. The judgment that came from the war in heaven, the fallen angels and the war in heaven against the Most High God, it resulted in the complete destruction of the earth, which is what, again, what we see in Genesis 1 2. And so, when you looking at the full rendering of all of what I was just talking about, I'll read the passage that when you take all the Greek words and look at the Hebrew, you put all those words together. This is the passage that you get from Genesis 1:2. And the primeval earth was without form and void, essentially means, and the primeval earth existed, fell out, came to pass, and was in a state of formlessness, confusion, unreality, emptiness, like a deserted wasteland, wilderness, a place of chaos, vanity, and like an undistinguishable ruin, void and wasted. So that's the complete context of that particular phrase. And if you look further into like Isaiah chapter 45:18, it tells us that the earth was not created that way. It was created perfect. But something happened, and again that was the war in heaven. And if you read other passages, we have like the only other place in the Bible where those exact same words were used, um, the without form and void, you find in Jeremiah chapter 4. And it's my opinion that the reason this same passage is found in this particular chapter is because Jeremiah is giving us a vision of the earth back at that time when there was not yet man and the fallen angels lived here. Because remember, I teach in the Genesis timeline that the fallen angels were cast out of the heavens on the second day. You can find this in the book of the Secrets of Enoch in chapter 29. It tells us that it was during the second day that Lucifer, deciding to rebel, that he was cast out on that day, but that there was iniquity found within him, and that he, as it says in Isaiah 14, wanting to be like the Most High, that he conceived the thought in his heart to try to overthrow Christ as the Son of God and to be like the Most High, and for that he was cast down to the sides of the pit. And the 1/3 of the angels of the Most High, the order that was under him, that joined him in rebellion, were also cast out as well. So the fallen angels were here on the earth before even pre-Adamic humanity and even before modern humanity. And so they were creating what we see as the megalithic structures, the cyclopean um, temple complexes that are scattered all over the world. And they were the ones that were building and creating during that time. And they kept trying to, as it says in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, to open up these stargates so that they can invite evil into this world. And then once pre-Adamic humanity was created, they tried to create a slave race of them, and they established worldwide the worship of the feathered serpent and also the blood sacrifice, victim sacrifice, child sacrifice, and the fertility festivals, the orgies that they practice, and the abomination that they engaged in, um, which, there's many passages I've shared and read them, how even the the watchers during the time that they came down, they saw that the children of Cain were involved in a lot of these abominable orgy type um, fertility festivals, and that's when they lusted after them and fell. But I'll read here Jeremiah chapter 4. It says, I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void, and the heavens, and they had no light. I beheld the mountains, and lo, they trembled, and all the hills moved lightly. I beheld, and lo, there was no man, and all the birds of the heavens were fled. I beheld, and lo, the fruitful place was a wilderness, and all the cities thereof were broken down at the presence of the Lord, and by his fierce anger. For thus hath the Lord said, the whole land shall be desolate, yet will I not make a full end. And so here God is telling us that he brought a judgment against these people that were living in this city, but yet, as Jeremiah tells us, there was not yet man. There was no man. And so he's telling us that this judgment was against the fallen angels, and that they lived here and inhabited these cities that were broken down at the presence of the Lord. And so, again, this is judgment that was brought against them. And we see this also in other places, like Ezekiel chapter 26. It tells us about, for thus said the Lord God, when I shall make thee a desolate city, like the cities that are not inhabited, when I shall bring up the deep upon thee, and great waters shall cover thee, when I shall bring thee down with them that descend into the pit, with the people of old time, and shall set thee in the low parts of the earth, in places desolate of old. So God here is talking about the destruction that he brought upon Atlantis. And we know that Atlantis, being part of the mythology that, it was passed down from very ancient times, it was speaking about the destruction that was brought again against the fallen angels, and that God destroyed in a single night that particular culture and that civilization. And again, this was a fallen angelic culture which existed way, way in our ancient past. And it's part of that destruction that we see referenced in Genesis 1, verse 2, where the earth became completely annihilated by a flood called the Catabo. And then, after the earth was recreated, reformed, reestablished, the firmament fitted to it, and then inhabited, repeopled, and repopulated with the creatures that we see in Genesis, the chapter 1 going forward all the way to chapter 2. And so that's, a long way to give you what is revealed in that particular. There's so much more, but I don't want to dominate. I've literally done hours and hours of shows on this material. If you want to look up on YouTube, Endeavor Freedom, the prior times, or the destruction of Atlantis, or there's a show called The Scroll of Thothis, Thothis, where I speak about the destruction of the First World Age in great detail. Or again, you can get Firmament, Vaulted Dome of the Earth, and Paradise, Sides of the North. I'll share one other thing with regard to what I was talking about with in Revelation, where Christ comes down here to the earth. That's when, the new heaven and the new earth, that the earth is destroyed in order to set and to create the earth in perfection again for what will be the coming of New Jerusalem and the establishment of the millennial reign. We see in Isaiah chapter 40 that it says, every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill shall be made low, and the crooked shall be made straight, and the rough places plain. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken it. I'll read really quickly where it talks about, in the Revelation of St. John the theologian, it tells us exactly what will happen in Revelation. It says, and then shall be lifted up all the race of men upon clouds, as the Apostle Paul foretold. Along with them we shall be snatched up in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and then shall come forth every evil spirit, both in the earth and in the abyss. Remember, this is the locust army, where it says that the angel was given the key of the bottomless pit, and we see the locust army coming forth, and that the locust army is a supernatural army that will have part to play in the judgment of the wicked at the end of days, those not written into the books of life. And so it says, and then shall come forth every evil spirit, both in the earth and in the abyss, wherever they are on the face of all the earth, from the rising of the sun even to the setting, and they shall be united to him that is served by the devil, that is the Antichrist, and they shall be lifted up upon the clouds. And again I said, Lord, and after that, what wilt thou do? And I heard a voice saying to me, Hear, righteous John. Then shall I send forth mine angels over the face of all the earth, and they shall burn up the earth 8,500 cubits. And the great mountains shall be burned up, and all the rocks shall be melted and shall become as dust. And every tree shall be burned up, and every beast, and every creeping thing creeping upon the earth, and everything moving upon the face of the earth, and every flying thing flying in the air, and there shall be no longer be upon the face of all the earth anything moving, and the earth shall be without motion. And again I said, Lord, and after that, what wilt thou do? And I heard a voice saying to me, Hear, righteous John. Then shall I uncover the four parts of the east, and there shall come forth four great winds, and they shall sweep all the face of the earth, from the one end of the earth to the other, and the Lord shall sweep sin from off the earth, and the earth shall sweep sin from off the earth, and the earth shall be made white like snow, and it shall become as a leaf of paper, without cave or mountain or hill or rock, but the face of the earth from the rising even to the setting of the sun shall be like a table, and white as snow. I'm almost done. Wait 1 second, Emily. As snow, and the rains of the earth shall be consumed by fire. And it shall cry unto me, saying, I am a virgin before thee, O Lord, and there is no sin in me. As the prophet David said aforetime, Thou shalt sprinkle me with hyssop, and I shall be made pure. Thou shalt wash me, and I shall be made whiter than snow. And again he said, Every chasm shall be filled up, and every mountain and hill brought low, and the crooked places shall be made straight, and the rough ways into smooth, and all flesh shall see the salvation of God. And again I said, Lord, and after that, what wilt thou do? And I heard a voice saying to me, Hear, righteous John. Then shall the earth be cleansed from sin, and all the earth shall be filled with a sweet smell, because I am about to come down upon the earth. And then shall come forth the great and venerable scepter, with thousands of angels worshipping it, as I said before, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man from heaven, with power and great glory. And then the worker of iniquity with his servants shall behold it, and gnash his teeth exceedingly, and all the unclean spirits shall be turned to flight. And then, seized by invisible power, having no means of flight, they shall gnash their teeth against him, saying to him, Where is thy power? How hast thou led us astray? And we have fled away, and have fallen away from the glory which we had beside him who is coming to judge us, and the whole human race. Woe to us, because he banishes us into outer darkness. The revelation of St. John the theologian.
All right. Is that, do you want me to move on to the next question then? Or did you have
Yeah.
any more to say, Colin? All right.
No, I think that's quite enough.
Okay, so you might have answered this question during your first, but question number 2 from Michael is, assuming Genesis 1-2 was after Atlantis, when the angels were already created, then how do you explain day 1 of creation, let there be light, as creation becoming invisible? In other words, does day 1 of creation actually come before Atlantis? For example, the timeline in the Bible is not linear.
Read that again, because I didn't understand it.
Sure. Assuming Genesis 1:2 was after Atlantis, then how do you explain day one of creation as creation becoming invisible? In other words, does day one of creation actually come before Atlantis?
Day one of creation. You mean like let there be light and darkness is separated? Uh,
Yes.
that well, no, that is all part of what we see as the unfolding, because it tells us that the earth and the heavens were all created on the first day. And so everything, there was already a prior creation of the earth and the heavens. Everything was already in existence, but then it became destroyed. And that's what we see in Genesis 1 2, as you know, the earth became without form and void. And so after that, we see a recreation. There's a new heaven and a new earth, and that is what is created after Genesis 1 2. So there's a prior creation and then there's a whole other creation after Genesis 1 2 because it all became destroyed.
All right. And Michael's third question was, did Genesis 1:26, and he put parentheses, creation of the pre-Adamics, occur after Atlantis but before Adam and Eve?
Yes, it did. And yeah, it's part of what is the recreation of the earth in Genesis 1 2 and onward. We see that this is the second, as it says in Second Peter, this is the second earth age. And so this is the new earth and the new heavens being recreated and being repopulated, as we see in Genesis 1 onward. And yes, Genesis 1:26 through 28 is specific to those creatures that were made on the earth. And I'll go ahead and bring that up. Let me go to that particular chapter. So, as I said, from Genesis 1 2 and onward, we see the re-establishment, the recreation of what is a new heaven and a new earth age. And when you get down to Genesis 1:26 through 28, and God said, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. So here we see that God creates the pre-Adamite peoples, both male and female, and he creates multiple couples. And it tells us in the Targum that he created multiple races, that they were black, white, red, and another color. I believe it's yellow. Um, and so the pre-Adamites were created all over the world. They were created male and female, which gave them the ability to procreate and to populate their own races in that particular area where God had placed them. And he created them in multiples. So it wasn't just one Adam. Um, and also, these beings were created on the earth, and they were told to multiply, to be fruitful and to multiply and replenish the earth. And so they were specifically created here on the earth, and they were told to populate it because, again, the earth had been destroyed, and all the creatures and all the beings uh, that were whatever were part of the first world age, they had all been destroyed. And I think we see um, the results of that are the mud fossils, the study of the mud fossils, and also of what we see as the ancient trees that in the old world age that everything was of very much larger size and proportion, and that the giants, even during that time, they were, the Titans, they were the Olympians, they were huge. And we see in the mud fossil record, and even the creatures, there's dragonflies that have been found with 6 foot wingspan. So all the ancient world, the creatures and the beings that were part of that ancient world, they were all of very much larger stature and had longer lifespan. And it was these beings in that world age that were destroyed. And so that's why even, the trees that we see, the remnants, what look to us like mountains, they are the remnants, the stumps of these ancient trees. And so it's hard for us to imagine and to fathom that. And this knowledge has now just come to light because it's inconceivable to us that beings and creatures and trees were that large. But this is indeed what we see locked into the fossilized record of the ancient world, that we see the trees and these ancient beings being petrified, and that they form what is now the landscapes and the mountains of the world. And so the preadamites are the new hominids that are created. They're created here in Genesis 1:26 through 28. And they are told to go forth and to be fruitful and to multiply and replenish the earth because, again, the prior world and the creatures of the old world, they were completely annihilated and destroyed. And so this is the account in Genesis is of the reestablishment of the earth, as I have been sharing and revealing for a very long time.
Great. All right. Michael's fourth question is, the Genesis 1:26 creation apparently was there before Adam and Eve, so what happened to them? Were they still around when Adam and Eve fell down to the planet? In other words, did pre-Adamite coexist with Adam and Eve?
Good question. And yes, they did. And we see even, records of that now. That some of these beings are still, like in these Solomon Island mysteries that I've been covering and sharing, there are giants still living here with us. I covered the Kandahar giants in a show recently. I did the modern giants, and even the Bigfoot type creatures. These were part of the preadamites, the hominids that walked the earth before modern humanity, what we call the Cro Magnon, the Dionysian man, whatever. I'm probably not saying that correctly, but they just found a whole other type of hominid. You had the Cro Magnon. You also had the elongated skull people. You had even the Cyclops and other hybrid beings. We have skulls that were found here in America of these giant skeletons where they had horns. And so all of these different type of hominid beings, um, there were many, dwarves, what we can call elves and trolls, all these different type of, it was literally like Lord of the Rings. I can share a passage from the Scroll of Thothis that talks about the destruction of this world age. Um, I won't read the whole thing, but this will give you an idea as to some of the type of creatures and the beings that were alive during that time. And it tells us the, as I said, if you read the fullness of this particular uh, this text, it's from the Qumran Bible. It's called the Scroll of Thothis. It makes mention of the fullness of the destruction of Atlantis. And so since this came up, I'll go ahead and read this, but this will tell you the different kind of creatures that were here during that time. All right, it says this. None knows in the truth of the old motherland or where it was. There are tales, but they disagree. The nine bows say it was southward. The learned are not united in thought. Some say towards the west where the sun now sets, while others say towards the east where the sun rises. Southward are great mountains and forests, monsters, and men covered with hair. Here winds are formed within the earth, issue forth from a black cavern. It is a place of chaos, where water, soil, and air are not separate. The old motherland could not have been there. To the left hand side there is a great wilderness, the land of Amua. The old motherland could not have given birth to such as these. To the right hand is the wide plain of man-eaters, which stretches out to the far reaches of old Kahamu. This was barren even in the oldest times. To the north of the wilderness the land is occupied by deformed men and dwarves, where amid this could have been the fertile pastures and plowlands well watered from the Sky River, where men lived in peaceful content. The old motherland was never there, nor, as some say, in the waters beyond, which boil at the extremity. Beyond the wide river there once was a land graced with all riches, needful to men, crowned by many walled Meru. But it was not the land of our birth. Northward the home of the cool breeze, but beyond the lands which skirt the salt water are the one-eyed peoples, and the giants with white hair and eyes. Here the rocks and stones are of the whitest marble, and the trees bear white fruit. Thus in the wilderness the eyes of men are blinded in their youth, for even the grass grows white. Before this is the land of Hasugia, a place unproductive and barren, where fruit never appears on the trees and will not ripe crops will not ripe then. How could the old motherland lie in this direction? In the books, in the old books, it is said that the old motherland was ruled by the Queen of Light, who was supreme above all. The temple tales tell that the lesser gods came to dwell among mortals when the mistress of brightness ruled in Kalathi, that they were sheltered in temples and priests were appointed to minister unto them. It is said that places of instruction were set up within the temples, but few men were taught the inner knowledge. It was rightfully held that it would be a danger to those without wisdom, and it had to be safeguarded. Is this not the tale told in the book of the beginnings? It is said that Kalathi lay within the borders of Kayamu, but could it not have been the land of similar surrounding name, outward from Pontus, beyond God's land? I'll read just a little bit more. Is it not set up both that they were engulfed in fire and water? In the book of the beginnings it is said that the generation passed, and a vast amount of knowledge and wisdom was accumulated and preserved in purity. It was the heritage of mankind, but though man had learned to cherish the light of truth and walk wisely with it, nevertheless, then as now, false priesthoods flourished. They pandered to the carnal desires of the underdeveloped and exploited the weaknesses of the ignorant. Their iniquity built up a vast weight of evil in the netherworld, which projected itself into the material of earth, so that the powers which upheld it became unstable. This caused all the southern part of the old land to sink down into heaving waters. The disaster was brought about through the ascendance of evil. Rites which awakened the dead were rife among the carnal minded and ignorant, while those who remained steadfast on the harder road of spiritual development had fixed their eyes on the light ahead, ignoring the pitfalls at their feet. It was then, even as now, will man ever learn. I'm just going to read the fullness. There's no sense cutting it off. So I'll just read this entire thing. Well, just this portion of it, anyways. This was the aspect of the disaster as written in the book of the beginnings. There were openings in the land from which evil vapors poured forth as a mist. Descending upon the people like a mantle, it spread out and covered the whole face of the land. The tongues of the people were stopped, and they became dumb with fear. The ground trembled beneath them, and great tongues of flame shot up. The whole land heaved and rocked like an ocean wave. As it rose and fell, it groaned and shook. The fires which strove beneath burst forth to be met with shafts of lightning and lightning striking down from heaven. A thick black cloud of smoke filled the land, and men were smothered in dust. As the setting sun rested on the horizon, it could be but dimly seen beneath the cloud as a fiery red ball. When it had gone, a gray, dense darkness prevailed, lit only by great sheets of lightning. The waters broke heavily over the land, sweeping it clean. The plains and the cities were covered, and new shores formed around the mountains. The waters mounted up until all that moved and lived was covered. The land was submerged. Mountain tops alone remained above the rush of uplifted torrent. Whirlwinds blew and brought cold winds, which cleared away the dust and the debris. Mud banks were formed, and a mountain mouth remained opened to spew forth vile vapors. During one long awful night, the doomed land was torn apart, and southward sank out of sight forever. A wise man has written, this was not the mountain-girt Kalathi or age-old Ramaku. This was the land out in the green waters where the sun sets, beyond Keftu near the lands of Henbenwa. It is then said, they came through the marshes and across the wild mountains, beyond the barren places of stone into a new land called Anketa. Here grew the great life tree known even in the days of our fathers. This is the tree of strange aspect like unto no other. Though in the days of our fathers it was barren and closed in flames, now we know that the life tree grew in Talius, which is towards the lands of Dawn by Pontus. Therefore, could not the old motherland have been found hereabouts? Not all was inundated. It is said men came out of the devastation. Behind them the land sank and the earth shook. Mountains split apart and crumbled. Where once there had been a valley, now stood a mountain. The air was filled with smoke, and hot rocks were hurled down from out of the sky. Men choked in brimstone. Great winds howled like 1,000 unearthly wild dogs. They left all behind them and came across the wild places to the land of refuge. Was not Kalmu once known to some men as the land of refuge? Therefore, the whereabouts of the old motherland is not unknown. It is said that when men came from the old land, the everlasting stars rested where earth meets heaven, but none knows how many lifetimes have passed since then. Thus, it is not impossible to discover where the old motherland lay. Therefore, there is hope, and men need not despair, for the secret may be rediscovered. When once again the sacred things rest in the old land from whence they came, the days of disturbance will cease, and once again men will live in peace. Men go forth to seek the road. All is not lost to us yet. That's the scroll of Thothus. And so you see, this is describing the destruction of Atlantis and the old world, and that we see even in the reference of this particular text, the mention of these pre-Adamite type humans and these giants and these titans and these cyclopses and all these weird creatures of old, men that are covered full in hair, like the Bigfoot. And, If you want to read more and study more on this, I recommend reading the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, because in that particular text it also gives great description of the destruction of Atlantis and how the Atlanteans dispersed to different parts of the world, and how it was that Thoth, who was an Atlantean priest king, he went to the land of Kim, which is the ancient land of Egypt. Kim coming from the word Ham. Um, and so that we know that the Hamites dwelt in the land of Kim. And so when it describes him going there and then meeting the hairy barbarians and then elevating them in truth and knowledge, and that he was the one that established and built the pyramids. And so, I mean, there's so much information from a wide array of different sources that when you have the eyes to see and you understand how the prior times fit into what is revealed in the Bible as the second world age, well then, then you're able to make sense of the fullness of the story, and understand how these other pieces also fit into what is the fullness of the biblical narrative.
All right. Thank you for that. Michael, I know you had one last question, but I do want to get to some of the other questions that the others had since we're running out of time. So Poppy asks, Hi, question for Zen. Is there a distinction between the groups in the book of Enoch entitled A, the elect, B, the righteous, and C, the holy ones? And how does that work?
Well, in my opinion, there may be a distinction, but really that it is all referencing the, the elect, the righteous, the patriarchs, the prophets, the apostles from the ancient times even until now. That there has always been a portion in humanity and in every era of history where the seekers of truth have been those that have been led by the Most High God and the Holy Spirit to truth and discernment, and that have worshipped Him in um, in subservience and in truth, no matter which age it was, and no matter what kind of persecution was brought upon them. Because as I show in my work, we have even since the war in heaven, there's been the separation of light and darkness, the division of good and evil, and that the fallen angels have been warring against the angels of light. And now we see it here in the earth, the war, the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. So there was never a time of where there was just general peace. It has always been chaos, death, and destruction, because the seed of the serpent rules in this world, and Satan has been given temporary reign over the second world age. Um, that peace and that prosperity that we are seeking for will not occur until Christ comes again to separate the harvest, and then judgment is brought, and the tares will be gathered for burning, and the elect, the wheat, gathered for preservation. And so it is through the duality of this world, the knowledge of good and evil, that we are learning why we need a sovereign God, and why we need a world which is ruled over by Him and controlled by Him. Because otherwise, given free will as angels and humanity, this is the kind of world we would create, a world of chaos, disorganization, rape, pillage, plunder, and slaughter. And it's only by the grace of God, because even though He's given Satan temporary reign of this world, he's the one that established the creation, and He established it in perfection and harmony. Again, the first world age being destroyed, this world age was recreated by Him. Satan does not have the power to create out of nothingness. Only the Godhead, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, have that capacity. and only they can give life. And so Satan and the fallen angels, they can manipulate and counterfeit and corrupt what is, as far as the creation and the material of creation, but they cannot create life from nothing. They can only, you know, corrupt and do genetic experimentation or hybridization, to try to create fit extensions for um, the the souls of the giants and the fallen angels that inhabit them. But it's only by the grace of God that we still see in the world that harmony and peace and justice, to the degree that we see them, rule. Even though amongst the New World Order, the elite and the seed of the serpent, the children of Cain, they are able to skirt the laws. They control the the man-made laws and justice systems and governments of the world. But at some point, they're going to be brought to judgment for the things that they have done, and they're living above the law in the manner that they have. And so, their reign is short-lived and only for a short time.
All right. Thank you for that. Brian asks, in Book of the Generations of Adam, quotations, my son Cain was not like unto our, for he seemed to have the mark of the Satans upon him. What does Zen think the mark of the Satans might be?
I believe the mark of the Satans is their seraphic appearance. And when I say seraphic appearance, we see that the the serpent in Genesis 3 that beguiled Eve was what we called a feathered serpent, or a dragon-like entity. That are the seraphim angels are snake-like, reptilian in form. And so, in my opinion, the seed of the serpent, their true nature, their true form, is to also have the seraphic appearance. Whether that's snake like, eyes, the slit eyes, or being reptilian in aspect, that, in my opinion, that is the mark of the Satans. And we see that also revealed. Uh, Christ calls them a den of vipers, and he associates even Satan, the adversary. In Revelation 12, he is described as that old serpent, that ancient dragon. And so, in my opinion, that is the mark of the Satans.
Alrighty, thank you. And Poppy asks, where was the Cave of Treasures located on the plane of the earth? How close was it to this group of men Zen now speaks?
What group of men?
I'm not sure what she was referring to. So I guess she must have asked it while you were mentioning something. So Poppy, if you could clarify what you meant by that, that would be fantastic. And I'll re-ask the question. But that said, I'll move on to the next one.
Oh,
Paula?
let me, real quick,
Okay.
the Cave of
Sure.
Treasures, it says, was east of Eden. In my opinion, paradise was somewhere near the North Pole. That when Adam and Eve were cast down, that paradise and the Mount of the Congregation is located at the North Pole, but they were placed east of that. And so I believe that it would be somewhere near Jerusalem, because Jerusalem has always been, and Israel has always been, the land of the Most High God. And so, in my opinion, it would make sense. And as we saw in our study of the Targum, that the altar which Adam had made, and which Abel and Cain brought their sacrifice upon, that was the same altar that Abraham used when he was offering Isaac up in sacrifice. And it's the same altar that Noah reestablished after the flood. and that he rebuilt it. And there, when he built a vineyard, um, and became drunken, when he first offered sacrifice and worship to the Most High God after coming off the ark, he rebuilt the ark that Adam had first established. And so, in my opinion, this is also where um, David built the holy temple, and where David had built the city of Jerusalem and established the city of Jerusalem, and that Solomon built Solomon's temple. And so, in my opinion, it would all be kind of linked as we see being revealed in the Targum.
Great, perfect. And Paulette asks, was Adam and Eve angels like we used to be, or were they a separate creation? And when after they fell, God used this as a plan to send Jesus to redeem us?
That's a really good question. And yes, before they were placed into flesh, because even Adam and Eve, like us, they pre existed as the sons of God, as angelic beings. But you'll notice that Adam, when his body was created from the dust, so even before he fell, his body was created of the dust, but in my opinion, they did not yet have blood within them. And so we see in Genesis, when they created, Adam says, when Eve is separated from him, created from his 13th rib, he says that she is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, but there's no mention yet of blood. And so, Adam's body being created of the dust, he had the he had the spirit breathed into it. That spirit, the nephesh, that is who we are in our original, immortal, bright natured, angelic type being. That's who we were in our original form. Even in our bodies now, it is the nephesh, the spirit, that gives our body warmth and gives our senses, the ability to touch, see, hear, smell. Through our bodies, it's our spirits that actually sense all of that. And it's our spirits that, separated from our bodies at night in dreams, they go on to, other non corporeal worlds. And so that's who we really are, the witness um, that dwells within our flesh. And when our bodies die, as those of you that listened to the show that I did last night on the moments after death and dying and the judgment, that the spirit is brought before the Most High God in judgment in preparation for being held until the great judgment at the end of days, at the end of the Second World Age, the great throne judgment. And so people can listen to that. But yes, and it's also my opinion that when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that this is when they became blood, flesh and blood beings. Because the blood then takes in the oxygen, and the oxygen places us under a cycle where our bodies are dying, and also our cells are having to continually replicate all throughout our lives. That being under the authority of death, we then are placed under mortality. And so that's also when their genitals appeared, and the serpent beguiling Eve impregnated her with Cain, and then Adam, repeating the act with Eve, impregnated her with Abel. And so when they were brought before God, first they covered their genitals and they tried to hide from him, and then he basically told them, you can't hide from me, as we saw in the study of the Targum. And have you eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which I warned you about and told you not to do? Because he said, in the day you do of it, you will die. And that's in fact what they did. They were cast out of paradise, they were exiled here to the earth, and Eve was told that she would bear children in sorrow. That's because God already saw she was pregnant. She was already pregnant with Cain and Abel. And that's why he told the serpent, there's going to be enmity between your seed and her seed, because he knew that Cain and Abel would be born from their having eaten fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Those were prophecies. Adam would have to work the soil in order to feed his children. All of those judgments in Genesis chapter 3, 15, 16, they were judgments, they were prophecies that God knew would unfold because they had transgressed his commandment to not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Great. All right. So it looks like we do have time for Michael's last question.
All right.
He asks, the Targum of Genesis 2:4 refers to God creating man pre-adamite, Adamite, as created him red, black, and white. Is this the origin of the modern day different races? For example, white, black, oriental, and how did these races carry over from Noah's flood? I cannot determine from him if they are part of the Genesis 1:26 creation or if they came down along with Adam and Eve.
No, they were already here. And remember, as I said, and you look at Genesis 1:26 through 28, they were created here on the earth. They were never in paradise. And so they were created to replenish, to be fruitful, and to replenish the earth. This was a commandment that was never given to Adam and Eve. They were not created to be on the earth. It wasn't until after they fell, after they were tempted, and they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that they took on human mortality. And then that's why they had to be exiled from paradise, because being in a fallen state, in a fallen form, if they would have ate from the tree of life, they would have been forever in a fallen form. So that's why God said that, we have to exile them and place them here on the earth where all of the other mortal creatures and beings lived, and including the fallen angels, because they were also placed under the authority of death. And so yeah, the pre-Adamic races were created red, black, and white, and yellow, and they were, as it says here, God created man in his own image, and the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. And so, male and female, um, of the white race, of the black race, of the red race, of the yellow race, and they were spread all over the world. And so there were multiple pre-Adamic type of beings, and they were created in couples, and they were spread all over the world. And so they were already here. And so even Cain, when he said that uh, he was afraid of being killed, he was talking about the pre-Adamic races, because they were involved with, as we see in Genesis 6, which I'll go to that as well, that in Genesis 6, it tells us that the sons of God, seeing the daughters of men, well, actually, it says, when men began to multiply, which again is a reference to Genesis 1:26 and to the pre-Adamites. Let me pull it up here. Okay. In Genesis 6, it says, and it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters are born into them. This is not a reference to the time of Yared, when the 200 watchers fell, but this is actually a time to referencing Genesis 1:26, because again, it was the pre-Adamites that were told, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it. So the sons of God actually came into the preadamites and mated with them and created the race of giants. And so the giants were here before even the modern creation of humanity and the children of Adam and Eve, and before Adam and Eve fell. And so that's why we see that Cain, he was fearful of these giants that were already living here upon the earth. And it wasn't the pre-Adamites that he was fearing. He was fearing the giants that were born of the sons of God mating with the pre-Adamites, creating the race of giants, as it says. And um, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that. When the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. And God saw that wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And so it was these giants, these men of renown, that Cain was fearful of being killed by. And so, um, that's when the the mark was placed upon him, which in my opinion was only a reprieve. It gave him a reprieve for 7 generations, and then he would be murdered by Lamech of his own bloodline. And so the curses would be upon his generation, and it would be karma that he would be killed by one of his own seed, being that he was a murderer, and that was a genetic trait that he passed down through his own lineage.
Thank you. We have 2 more questions. I realized that you didn't get a break, Zen. You've been talking for
That's
a
all right.
long time. Okay, so thank you for powering through.
Yeah, no
But
worries.
Paulette asks, in all of Zen's teachings, YouTube clips, what is the best video / teaching to expose people to when trying to wake people up?
Depends on, really, it depends on what topic you're trying to get people to become knowledge upon. Because really, we've got over 1,000 videos of several. I mean, we do 4 hours at least, sometimes 8 hours a week of teaching. And so there's a lot available out there. And so, as far as generally waking up, I think there's a show that I did in the beginning all the way to the end. Um, and anything on the Great Contest, because the Great Contest is all about the bigger picture, and it's to help people to understand how the war in heaven led to the enmity between the seed lines, and how that ties together with what we see if with our current situation of the New World Order against humanity, and how it is that we are contending with evil even in this day and age. Because, as I said, evil has been with us ever since the beginning. There has never been a time of peace and just joy and happiness. There has always been contention, the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And this will continue until Christ comes again. And so, really, if you want to, also I've done a lot of shows on like helping people to understand the grand matrix, or the matrix of illusion, and so you can search for those shows on YouTube as well. um, but I would try to be specific with a particular issue or topic, because as I said, we get so very detailed and so very specific on so many different topics and issues which are not covered in the mainstream churches or by pastors or preachers, and especially those that only study and read from the Bible, that have never read the extra biblical material or the other ancient manuscripts. Because of that, they're very limited in their knowledge and what is revealed in as truth